Hi, everyone. I'm Judy the YouTube Lawyer. Today, we have a last-minute live stream to discuss the recent shooting incident that occurred at the Irvine Taiwanese Presbyterian Church in Laguna Woods, California. So I just heard about this late last night while just scrolling through some news feeds and saw that there was a shooting that happened on Sunday afternoon at a Taiwanese church, and that happens to be the city where I have an uncle who lives there. So I contacted my cousins, and they immediately confirmed that this indeed was the church that my aunt and uncle attend. And they were actually there when this unfortunate incident happened, but luckily they are safe. So let's bring up one of many news articles that has recently been published about this terrible crime. Um, the basic gist of it is that there was a man who most likely has some mental health issues, a 68-year-old man who is actually from Taiwan himself, but I guess he always considered himself Chinese. It looks like the Taiwanese government had some records showing that he was actually born in Taiwan in 1953. But sounds like his parents were from China, and that growing up, perhaps he felt a bit ostracized because he was from a family that was from mainland China and probably felt like he didn't fit in with the so-called local Taiwanese children or something. I'm not sure how old he was when he came to the United States, probably as an adult. And he actually is a US citizen now. So his name is David Chou, and he lived in Las Vegas, Nevada. So he specifically drove all the way down to Laguna Woods, California, just to commit this crime. He drove down on Saturday, and then the next day showed up to the Taiwanese church. There was a woman, I believe, or someone who was a receptionist who greeted him and spoke to him in Taiwanese and asked him to sign in and give some personal information. So he basically lied and said he had already been there a couple of times, so he didn't want to give more detailed information about himself. So they just, of course, welcomed him, and he sat towards the back reading a Chinese newspaper during most of the service. After this special service where they were welcoming back former pastor Billy Cheng, there was a special lunch held right afterwards. So some of the congregants already left, but this person, the alleged shooter, David Chou, continued staying there. And then while people were eating, he then decided to pull out his guns and first fired a shot into the ceiling and then started shooting at the people inside. Oh, I forgot to mention another detail, which is that before he started shooting, he had gone around the church and started chaining up the exit doors and putting super glue or putting glue in the locks and nailing shut at least one of the exit doors. I mean, it seemed like a very, very complex plan. And I just find it interesting that he was able to go into the church like that with 3 bags, and nobody really noticed him or thought that there was anything weird about him, bringing in these 3 bags and then just sitting in the back of the church. And I'm assuming that this wasn't a really huge mega church. It sounds like there might have been about 130 or 140 people there at the service. But then I also saw some news stories saying that at the lunch, maybe there were only about 40 people. So I'm not entirely sure, but clearly this was not a mega church. I think that it's kind of interesting that nobody immediately thought, like, well, who's this stranger here just sitting here? I think people were just totally caught off guard and never thought that something this horrible could happen in their small little Taiwanese church community. So let's bring up one of these articles here. So it says, suspect is charged. Suspect faces multiple charges in the deadly California church shooting. The man accused of opening a fire on a Taiwanese church congregation in California was charged on Tuesday with first-degree murder and 5 counts of attempted murder for what a prosecutor called an effort to execute as many people as possible. The district attorney in Orange County said that David Chou, 68, of Las Vegas, faces enhancements for, quote, lying in wait and use of a firearm, as well as 4 counts of possessing destructive devices with intent to kill or harm. So he also, in addition to bringing a bunch of ammunition and two guns, he also brought, I think, Molotov cocktails or some sort of explosive devices that he had started setting up around the church inside there. So this church, the Taiwanese church, actually uses space at a larger Presbyterian church. So it's a very big facility. And looking at the pictures, it did look sort of familiar to me because my relatives live in the retirement community that is right next to this church, and everybody there is elderly. So I did see an article saying that the average age of the congregants was about 80 years old. And when you look at the ages of the victims, they ranged in age from 66 to 92. And the Dr. John Cheng, who we're going to talk about more later, the one who was killed, he was only 52 years old, and that was his first time visiting. The reason he was there was because he was accompanying his mother, because she wanted to go there and be there when the former pastor showed up for that special event. And another sad thing is that Dr. Cheng's father had just passed away about a month prior to this. So as he lay dying near the shooter, who was quickly subdued, in part due to Dr. Cheng's heroic deed of charging forward at the guy, his mother was sobbing and crying for him while he was dying on the church ground. So this is really sad. So this article from NPR says that mentions about how Chou drove down to Orange County on Saturday. He had chained the doors and put super glue in the keyholes. He had 2 9mm handguns legally purchased years ago in Las Vegas and 3 bags containing 4 Molotov cocktail type incendiary devices and extra ammunition. He opened fire, and in the ensuing chaos, Dr. John Cheng, 52, tackled him, allowing other parishioners to subdue him and tie him up with extension cords. So that I find, wow, pretty amazing. Just reading more about Dr. Cheng, it sounds like he was a beloved doctor. He was active at a different church, and he was married with 2 children, one of whom is supposed to be graduated from high school soon. So Dr. Cheng grew up in Texas, where his own father was also a doctor, and he attended Texas Tech for medical school, and later went to UCLA for his residency and fellowship, and was the founder of medical practice in Aliso Viejo, which focused on primary care as well as sports medicine. So he did a lot of work for high school athletic teams and did a lot of volunteer work. And there's already a big memorial out there in front of his medical clinic. Yeah. So this is the pastor that people were welcoming back after he had gone on a trip to Taiwan. So Pastor Cheng was the one who was then able to get a chair and either throw it or hit it against the shooter to knock him down on the floor. And then Pastor Cheng's wife somehow grabbed some sort of like orange cable or some sort of electrical type of cable. I'm not really sure. I mean, that's pretty amazing. I mean, there was a lot of quick action needed there. And ultimately, there were 5 other people shot in addition to the doctor who passed away. So one thing interesting that I also read in one of the articles was that after the parishioners all were able to subdue the shooter and tie him up with that cable, then David Chou then said that he couldn't breathe. So they just loosened it up a little. I mean, wasn't that nice of him? And the pastor's wife took the guns and put them in the church refrigerator. I mean, talk about exhibiting kindness towards this person who had just shot up the congregation. I mean, that guy is lucky to be alive, but it sounds also like David Chou had a ton of issues, and nothing was going well in his life either. He sounds like well, it sounds like he probably had a decent life for a while. He owned a small apartment building around Las Vegas, and one of his former tenants or his neighbor spoke to the media and said that Mr. Cho was a nice man for quite a while, and the neighbor would only sometimes hear him, yelling at his wife, which is kind of sad. It doesn't sound like they have any children, but I'm not sure. So ultimately, for some reason, Mr. Cho sold, or he and his wife sold that apartment building to a different company or person. And then they were supposed to be renting an apartment back from the person that they had just sold the building to. So at that point, they made about $500,000 off the sale of the building. So his wife, who was then diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer, decided to take her chunk of the money and move away and get away from him. So she left him last year to go back to Taiwan. Sounds like a very sad situation if she has stage 4 lung cancer. And then he kind of fell into a funk, and the what do you call it? I mean, the new buyer, the landlord, the buyer of his building, then decided to raise the rent on him, so he couldn't afford it anymore. So he was basically homeless. I'm not sure where exactly then he was living. So he had to run around trying to get jobs as a security person, which I'm sure it's not really in demand when you're 68 years old. Like, who wants to hire you to do security for their building or for any sort of event when you're a 68-year-old man? So he couldn't find steady employment. And it does seem like something was wrong with him. Even the neighbor noticed that maybe about 3 to 5 years ago, he had a head injury because when he was still the owner of the apartment building, he went to confront a tenant who was late on rent, and that tenant blew up at him and beat him up so badly that his skull was fractured. And I think he also had at least some other limb, maybe an arm or something, that was broken during that altercation. So after then, the neighbor did notice that there seemed to be a change in the guy's personality, and that, coupled with his financial difficulties and his wife filing for divorce and leaving him, I guess then this person felt like he had nothing else to live for. And with his extremist views, which he wrote about, they found some writings in his vehicle right after the shooting about how he was upset about political tensions between China and Taiwan, and he was angry at the people who asserted that Taiwan should be independent or whatever. I mean, so that ultimately, in a nutshell, is what I recall reading in the last half day about this case. And thank you guys so much for being here. I'm checking out the comments now. Yeah, thank you for being here. Thanks, Sonia, Elaine. Yeah, it is a very sad and shocking thing. And I just felt like, since this affects my greater community that I have some tie with through my relatives who actually go to this church, that perhaps I should at least have some sort of quick live stream about it so that people know more about this situation. And of course, I do also want to express my sympathies to all the victims of the shooting in Buffalo, New York, those poor people who were just shopping at the grocery store, and then along comes this teenager just going out shooting up the grocery store. And I feel very sorry for those people. And there was a shooting at a flea market in Houston this weekend. And on top of that, recently there was also a shooting of 3 Korean women at a beauty salon in Dallas, Texas, by an African American man who is still on the loose. So it just seems like everywhere you go, every single day, there's like shootings across America. And of course, sometimes there are, sometimes it's politically motivated or racially motivated or a symptom of mental illness or who knows what. But there's definitely just way too much violence in this world, as well as in our country, with the wrong types of people getting their hands on guns. So, yeah, my heart's been hurting over all of these shootings this last week. Yeah, I mean, it makes you feel kind of powerless. Like, what can I do about it? And sometimes, I mean, at least for me, it almost makes me feel like hiding more at home, because it just seems to be a little bit too dangerous to be out there in public, like in large crowds, or even going to the mall. Like the mall that I normally go to, that is probably about a 15 to 20-minute drive away, South Point Mall, has had some shooting incidents in the last couple of years where suddenly there's like a stampede, or people are locked down and hiding in the stores because there's some shooter going around in the mall. So it's like where can you be safe? There's always bound to be some like crazy nutty person, who just decides that they're going to take it out on everybody. So yeah. Well, yeah, I tried to read as much as I could, while also getting some work done today. So, and I also just sent some emails and texts with my cousins, and I asked one of my cousins if she would like to be a guest on today's live stream just to talk about it, because she grew up with the different Taiwanese church groups and has more of a connection with that community, especially since it was, her father, who is my uncle, who, was active in the church there in Laguna Woods, or he still is. I mean, thank God they managed to escape. And it's kind of a strange coincidence, but I posted about it on Facebook. Yeah, I still use Facebook because I'm old. And one of my good friends said that her husband's relatives, or aunt and uncle, also were there and go to that church. So I told her, oh, well, I'm sure then our relatives know each other then, because it's not that big of a church there. Yeah. So, yeah, thank you for looking into this deeper. Yeah, definitely. So let's take a look here to remember Dr. John Cheng, who is the victim of this shooting. And so many people said so many nice things about him, about how he did so much volunteer work for the high school football team, and he would show up to their athletic events and give the athletes discounts, or just a very involved person. And I'm not sure if his child, who is graduating from high school soon, is a boy or a girl, but perhaps that child was also very into athletics, and I'm sure he was a great father also. So this is a video on YouTube showcasing him, where he's talking about how he got into medicine. So I hope this can actually be heard. And it turns out he also had a martial arts studio too. So clearly, he's one of those like overachiever types who want to do everything, and, always helping people and telling his colleagues the importance of self-defense. Yeah.
Involved with medicine in the first place is I come from a family of physicians, and I saw the care that my father imbued upon his patients in the small community in East Texas. And I saw the community rally around him and embrace him as a physician in the community. And I love that. And it's those small town values that were ingrained in me when I was younger that really helped create this sense of community. And in this modern society, this modern times, we miss a lot of that. And so when we are interacting with patients, it's one-on-one, and that patient-doctor relationship is very special. So you get to know a lot about the patient, their family, the community they live in. And what's beautiful is that I live in the same community. We try to meet patients where they're at. Some people may be ready for a total life change, and some are just not ready for that. And so we personalize it to how do we get this person moving in the right direction at the right time for the right reasons. But patients will oftentimes come in, and at the end of the visit, they'll say, you know what, Dr. Cheng, you're the first doctor that's actually ever really listened to me. Sports medicine is very big in South Orange County, and we have a lot of very talented athletes, and we have a lot of weekend warriors, and we have a lot of want to be aspiring athletes. And my role as the family physician, sports medicine physician, is to help understand where they're at and what their goals are. So we make different adjustments and modifications, and having to think outside the box with each individual patient that comes in our doors, is that somehow we can touch their lives for the better. We're planting seeds in this person's heart and in their mind on how to take care of themselves. And when they're taking care of themselves, then they're able to take care of their family, which creates a more positive family environment, which then translates into better communities.
Okay, so that's a really nice video. One of the articles I read mentioned this YouTube video from probably about 9 to 10 years ago of Dr. John Cheng talking about his medical career. So yeah, I mean, once again, it's such a small world because after I did my little Facebook posting, one of my old friends from college, who is actually an attorney who had been on one of the live streams here, she had been very active with martial arts in California. And she said she had a lot of mutual friends who had trained with Dr. Cheng or knew him through the martial arts world. So deepest condolences to his family. I mean, what a horrible day and tragedy, to go from such a happy event at the church and having a lunch honoring the pastor versus, some crazy loon, just getting up and starting to shoot at everybody. So, it's thanks to the heroic act of Dr. Cheng tackling the shooter and subduing him and giving people a little bit extra time to react, to be able to also pile up on top of the guy and hit him with a chair and tie him up and stuff. I mean, what a horrible thing to happen. Yeah. And there is also a GoFundMe. I mean, it seems like every time something happens, there's going to be a GoFundMe, right? But I do want to share that in case anybody is interested in that. But it was started by a woman named Grace Chen, whose parents are also congregants, but they happened to have tested positive for COVID that weekend or that week. So they didn't go to church that day. So this is, I hope it shows up on the screen. Yeah, it says Victims Fund for Southern California or SoCal Taiwanese church shooting. But see here, they already exceeded their goal, which I know this kind of website just keeps bumping up the goal, right? Like as long as people keep donating and donating, I think what they do is then the website just continues to keep raising the goal to encourage more people to give more money or something. So they've already raised $109,945. But just thinking about this, from what I know of the community, though, this is a very affluent community. I don't think anyone that lives around there is poor by any stretch of the imagination. So if you are inclined to donate to any family members or victims of shootings or something, I mean, I think I personally would prefer that people donate to the families of the victims in the shooting in Buffalo, New York, because I get the feeling that that community is a lot more in need of donations as opposed to, people, elderly Taiwanese people living in Laguna Woods. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, that's great that there was a fundraiser and so many people immediately gave so much money, but there are definitely lots of people in need out there. Okay. Yeah. So this has gotten so much press that even the Taiwanese president has been quoted in an article here from the Los Angeles Times. So I'd like to also show that here. It says President Tsai Ing-wen's office issued a statement Tuesday saying she condemned any form of violence, extended her condolences to those killed and injured, and had asked the island's chief representative in the United States to fly to California to provide assistance. Many of the congregants at the Irvine Taiwanese Presbyterian Church, which rents space at Geneva Presbyterian Church in Laguna Woods, are elderly immigrants from Taiwan. Okay, so this is where they talk more about how, according to their records, David Chou was actually born in Taiwan. And it says, according to Taiwanese media, Chou had ties to a mainland Chinese-backed organization opposed to Taiwan's independence, although details could not be immediately confirmed. China claims Taiwan as its own territory to be annexed by force if necessary, and regularly denounces Tsai, her ruling Democratic Progressive Party, or DPP, and their foreign supporters in increasingly violent terms. Tensions between China and Taiwan are at the highest in decades, with Beijing stepping up its military harassment by flying fighter jets toward the self-governing island. So anyway, I mean, who knows what was really behind this? I mean, was it really just the action of David Chou, who is probably mentally ill or depressed and has nothing to lose, so he decides he wants to go shoot up the Taiwanese church? Or is he part of a larger organization that is deliberately planning these things? So we're not sure at this point, but it does make it sad that people who just, these elderly people who just want to go to church and have, just to have this ability to worship together and have a sense of community, that it can also be so tragically affected. And I mean, it probably does enhance any sort of suspicion amongst any sort of Taiwanese church to wonder if anyone is there to spy on them or to cause harm to the congregants. So I think maybe after the shooting, then many churches may also think about bumping up their security, or think of, what kind of drills should we have, or what is our emergency evacuation procedure, how we're going to defend ourselves and try to prevent these types of incidents from happening. So, yeah, Chinese, yeah, probably, yeah. I mean, this is kind of tangentially related, but I don't know if you guys were interested in the news surrounding the Beijing Olympics, but I read that Alyssa Liu, the figure skater's father, was also being harassed by people that were probably being employed by the Chinese government to just, harass him right around the time that his daughter was supposed to be going to China to compete at the Olympics, because Arthur Liu, Alyssa's father, had previously been involved in a lot of activism and trying to fight for democracy in China before he finally left to come to the United States. So, I mean, I wouldn't put it past them to have some sort of like organized, much larger group that is beyond David Chou, but, maybe many people that are trying to, break up the Taiwanese immigrant organizations or try to sabotage them. So I wouldn't put it past them. So, yeah, and just to give a little bit of background, I mean, of course, sometimes people are afraid that there are going to be repercussions, or that their family members might have issues down the road. So, I mean, my parents came from Taiwan in the early 1970s because my father was doing his residency in the South. So that's basically the story. And then later, my parents moved back to Taiwan. So, growing up, you always hear a little bit about the tensions between mainland China versus Taiwan, and of course, there was some sort of like conflict or animosity between people who considered themselves Taiwanese or had, lived in Taiwan for centuries versus the people who fled the mainland in the late 1940s or came over in the 1950s. So when I was growing up, I remember my mother often speaking about people from mainland China in negative terms, like they were supposedly, devious or just low class or just untrustworthy. that there was definitely this divide between, people who were from China versus from Taiwan, or felt Taiwanese versus, being more allied with China. So, anyway, but I have lived all my life in the United States, so it's not something that I'm very activist about or anything, but definitely I do feel that we do need to be more cognizant of these kind of factions that there are, even amongst people that seem to be similar, like people from Taiwan, just like David Chou versus, trying to kill people at the Taiwanese church. It's just really saddening and very mind-boggling that this happened. So, okay. So unless there are any other comments out there, I think it's been about half an hour. And thank you guys for joining in this very last minute live stream. Just wanted to bring more attention to this terrible tragedy. And I hope the victims who are still in the hospital will be able to recover. There was one article which did say that the victims are all expected to recover. All 4 of them? No, there are 5 of them. Yes. Although it is pretty scary if one of the victims is 92 years old already. I mean, just so awful, because this is also the church that my grandmother went to with my aunt and uncle before she passed away when she was 100 years old. So I do feel a bit of kinship with this church, even though I never actually went to their services, but I've definitely visited that area. And the people there are all like very nice, very educated. I think the majority of them are actually United States citizens who have lived in this country for many, many years, like my aunt and uncle. So yes, thank you, Sonia and Elaine. I really appreciate you being here. And I got to watch your latest food video too. I will definitely be watching tonight. Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Tuan Reynolds Dang. Yeah, prayers for all those involved. May they have a speedy recovery. Yes, and let us also remember John Cheng and his family and the sacrifice that he made for everybody on Sunday. So have a good evening, and I'll see you at the next live stream, which is going to be on Friday at 7:45 p.m. Eastern Time with my friend Michelle Lin, who's going to talk about how life was after she went to Fordham University Law School and did not practice law. So take care and be safe. Thank you.